Hi, my name is Dan. We're going to be installing a car stereo today in my 2002 Suzuki station wagon. I have already taken the liberty to pull some of the trim panels out and my stock stereo, which is no good anymore. We have our pride and joy here, which is a Pyle Chopper series PLA 2200. It is a 2-channel amplifier with 1400 watts. I've used Pyle before in the past. It has always made me happy, so I'm very excited about this one as well. Inside the box comes with instructions, and it also comes with some basic mounting screw hardware. This Pyle amplifier has your basic power hookups. It has power, a remote, and a ground. It has dual fuses and your speaker outputs, all simple screws. On the other side of our amplifier, we have RCA inputs and outputs to run your amplifier in series, which we won't be doing today. It also has a level gain, a bass boost, and a adjustable crossover for both low and high depending on your application. System, we have a wiring harness that will quickly adapt our head unit to our factory wiring harness. We will need to do some splicing, so we have our splicing wire connectors as well. We have some zip ties for tying our wire down. We have a RCA cable, 2-wire, it's 16 foot. We will be doing a rear mount install of the amplifier. And we have a 8 conductor wire, speaker wire, that we will be making easy installation for this amplifier as well. We don't want to have to run separate wires, so we're just going to do it all at once. Some of the tools we will need today are going to be wire cutters and strippers, crimpers for our wire connectors. We have a test light for finding our power. We have just your typical Phillips head flathead screwdrivers. Our first step of operation will be disconnecting the battery, which we have already done. You should always do that when you're working on electronic devices. We will be installing our power wire first thing. We will be going from the fuse box under the hood, and we will be drilling a hole underneath the dashboard through the firewall, and it will route underneath the dashboard. And we have already removed our trim panels for running all of our wire. Alright, our first step of running power wires is you need to drill a hole through your firewall. The next step is to mount your inline fuse to a place that's going to be out of the way of the engine and not going to rattle around or get too hot. We are choosing the main battery plug on our fuse block here. Make sure that it's a good clean connection. So we've run our power wire through the firewall, and we've run it behind the console for the stereo and the dashboard. We've brought it over here to our trim panel, and we are joining it with the rest of our wires. Just need to make sure when you do this that everything runs nice and clean. Okay, we're here at the rear of the vehicle where we're going to be installing our Pyle amplifier. And one of the first things you need to make sure is that you have a heavy enough gauge power wire and ground wire to support the amplifier. This is 1400 watts. It will take quite a bit of juice. So we're using an 8-gauge wire. One of your first connections needs to be your ground wire. We have chosen a close ground that is clean and easily accessible so that we can hook this up. Our next step is going to be hooking up our positive wire for our battery to our amplifier. I am actually splitting these because we are using a heavy gauge wire and our terminals won't quite take it, so we're going to go on either side of our screw. Go ahead and take your time. Make sure you get a good wire connection on there. You don't want any shorts or any wires crossing over to where they don't need to go. And make sure you get it good and snug, but don't over tighten it. You can strip these out. Next, we have our remote wire here that comes all the way from the radio head unit. This allows the amp to turn on and off. And that just goes into our remote socket. Go ahead and snug it down and make sure it's a good connection. If you have to, give it a little tug, make sure it's not loose. Over here we have our speaker wire that we have running all the way from the front. This will be the power from the amplifier back to our speakers. We are running a separate remote wire. You don't have to necessarily do it. Ours came with a remote wire, but we're not going to be using that, so we'll go ahead and cut that off. And Since we are using a 2-channel amplifier for 4 speakers, we are just going to have a right and a left. And as you can see on these, there are stripes for our negative wires, and we have just plain wires for our positive wires. So both of our negatives for our right hand side speakers will be tied together and hooked into the negative console here. And once again, just remember that needs to be a good solid connection, nice and snug and tight. Loose wires are no good. They make bad radio sounds. So there is our right channel. And just make sure you take your time and you get all of your wires lined the way they're supposed to be lined up. Once again, a short can be a very bad thing in a stereo system. So go ahead and get all that snugged down. And good and tight and clean looking there. There's our audio wires. And last but not least, we have our input from our head unit that is going to go into our input on the side of our amplifier. And these cables just click right in, just like that. I've already gone ahead and prepped everything together. So we have our factory wiring harness. We have our wire coming from the amplifier for the audio for our speakers. We have our RCA cables for the supply to the amplifier, and we have our remote wire for turning the amplifier on and off. So we can go ahead and hook all this up. We have our remote wire, which will plug into our stereo remote connection. We have, on our stereo connection here, we have taken all of the stereo outputs, and we are not using these since we are bypassing this with an amplifier. So we are going to connect the amplifier to our stereo speakers. Now remember that we have a 2-channel amplifier and we're running 4 speakers. So what we've done is we have paired all of our wires together, so we have a left and right but no front to rear. So we can go ahead and connect all of these. And make sure that you get your positive and your negatives together. They'll be marked with black stripes for the negatives and no stripes for the positives. Make sure you get them set good and snug. They should click in. We have our power wires here. Same thing. Make sure that we get them all plugged in and good and snug and tight. Our final connection is our ground wire that goes into the car. And we can go ahead and plug in our factory wiring harness to our existing plug. And here we are. We are pretty much all wired and ready to go for the radio. We now have our universal mount installed in the car to accept our different size and style of radio from our factory radio. Be sure to remember to pull through the antenna for the radio and your other wires that we have previously hooked up. And now we are going to go ahead and hook all of our wires up and install this. The antenna should slide right into the antenna slot. Our RCA cables should have a spot right on the back, and make sure you have a left and a right. And we have a left and we have a right in the back of our radio. And we have our 1 power plug connector. Plugs right in like that. And make sure you don't pinch any wires when you go to slide all this in. And as it slides in, you should hear it click into place. Just like that. Okay, now we have the battery plugged back in and we have our radio turned on. We are going to go ahead and set our levels up. And you want to turn your radio up about 3/4 of the way to a decent listening volume. And then we'll go back to the amplifier. So here we have our level input, and we're just going to turn our level up until we start getting some distortion in our speaker. Once you get some distortion, you want to turn it back down just a little bit, and then you should be set. This is a fairly simple install for the Pyle Chopper series, PLA 2200. Anybody should be able to do this with a few basic tools that we showed earlier, and it's very nice to have tunes in the rear of my car again. Thank you for watching this video, and hope it's informative to anybody that needs it.